All right, this video is titled Transitional Ballistics. And in this video, we're going to cover the definition, what exactly is transitional ballistics, the series of events that takes place as a bullet exits the muzzle and enters into the atmosphere. We're going to discuss that. We're also going to talk about accuracy issues that are pertinent to transitional ballistics. We're going to talk about crowning in particular. We're also going to visit about blast signature and flash signature and some issues that come up there. And then we're going to get into sound suppressors briefly, muzzle brakes. We already covered some aspects of that already in internal ballistics, muzzle brake pull-off, and we're going to discuss flash hiders. And all these things are in the context of extreme long-range precision shooting. So if you haven't been watching the series, that's the context that we're talking here. So transitional ballistics, we've covered internal ballistics. That's what happens while the projectile is making its way down the rifle bore before it exits the rifle. And we're about to get into external ballistics. That's basically after the bullet leaves the rifle and is flying through the air. There's a lot to that science. But something that's often overlooked is this transitional ballistics subject. And it is important. There are certain things in here you want to be aware of. So let's get to it. Basically, the definition of transitional ballistics is the study concerning the motion of a projectile during its transition from the inside of the rifle bore to its free flight through the atmosphere. This is basically the transition point, like we said before, between internal and external ballistics. So what happens anyways? What's the summary of what goes on during this transitional period? Well, basically, what we have going on is when the bullet reaches the muzzle of the barrel, as it's passed through the rifling and it's just about to exit, you have these escaping gases, and they're under extraordinary pressure, and they're sometimes like hundreds of times normal atmospheric pressure. But the second the bullet exits the muzzle, the seal is broke, and these highly pressurized gases supersonically escape past the bullet in all directions. You got to think that the bullet is acting as kind of a plug or a seal as that gas pressure is building up. But it even starts kind of escaping as the bullet is approaching the muzzle. Some of the gases are venting past the bullet on its way down the bore as well. But as that seal is broke, the second the heel of the bullet clears the muzzle, or if it's a tapered bullet like a boat tail, you're going to have highly pressurized gases, and they're going to supersonically, breaking the speed of sound, jet past that bullet and get out of that seal. That's why you have that thunderclap, the gunshot sound. It's actually the expanding gases escaping around the bullet as it's exiting that seal at supersonic speeds. That's why it has such a crack to it. And also, another part of the crack of a rifle bullet, obviously, is the actual projectile just traveling beyond the speed of sound as well. That creates a supersonic crack that's so easily recognizable with a rifle shot. And although the bullet is free from the rifle itself the second the bullet exits the muzzle, there's still forces being exerted on that bullet during the transitional phase. You have all these burning propellant gases continuing to exert that force on the bullet right as it's exiting the barrel. So it's actually a very crucial phase in the flight of a bullet. So what exactly about this topic of transitional ballistics should we concern ourselves with as long-range precision shooters? Well, obviously, accuracy issues are going to be pretty important for us. So one thing we need to be familiar with is how crowning works and what crowning is. Now, if you're not familiar with that term, the crown is basically the last part of the rifle bore right at the muzzle. That's going to be the last contact point of that bullet in that rifling. So that's the crown is going to be right on that edge. And there's different techniques that machinists use to try to get that as square as possible or as even as possible, symmetrical on all sides. There's a couple different ways to that machinists do the crowning when they're finishing off a rifle barrel, when they're doing the muzzle end. And sometimes they do have just a 90-degree corner, and the crown is just 90 degrees. Unfortunately, that doesn't work so well classically for several reasons. when you're doing some machining, you're going to have little metal slivers and stuff like that building up on that sharp edge there. So it makes it kind of difficult with the 90-degree corner to get that perfectly symmetrical all around. And so what most guys do is they put like a certain amount of degree taper on the crown. And that's why if you look on the end of a muzzle in most of these rifles, you'll see it looks like it's indented, or, there's a taper. A lot of guys do the 11-degree taper crown. And there's a couple different reasons for that. One of the main reasons is that it'll actually prevent damage to the crown if the rifle is kind of bumped up against something hard. That would normally, if it was just a 90-degree corner, it would easily gouge that. And it would just take a microscopic, tiny little gouge on one of the corners of the rifle links to cause enough asymmetrical disturbance as that bullet's exiting to really throw that bullet for a wild loop as it's going through its transitional phase. So the crowning idea, or getting that tapered crown, that 11-degree taper crown, or however, there's a lot of different ways of doing this, is to kind of protect that. Another reason is if it's an angle rather than just a square 90-degree corner, you're easing that transitional phase a little bit, and because the angle's reduced a little bit there. So you're going to have, the gases are going to have a little bit extra of a chance to start escaping. The transition is not going to be so violently abrupt with a tapered crown. So that's another thing that can help to ease that transition and will cause less of a disturbance potentially. So basically, the main thing to be concerned with here is that when you're deployed in the field with your long-range precision rifle, take great care as to the muzzle of your barrel, because that crowning is very, very delicate. And even, like I said before, it could be just a small abrasion, even smaller than you can see, and that could be enough if it's on the corner of one of the rifle links to really throw you for a loop. So take great care protecting your rifle crown. It's worthy to note also that, as we discussed in our mechanical and thermal erosion videos, that the crown area is susceptible to accelerated erosion due to increased surface area, and that's where a lot of venting of gases happen around that corner. So that's going to cause more erosion up there. So it is possible over time that if your crown does get out of whack, or it does get subjected to too much thermal or mechanical erosion, and you start to lose some accuracy potentials, you can trim your barrel back just a little bit, and a gunsmith can get in there with the tooling and make a nice fresh crown and repair that. So it's not impossible to fix. So that's something to be aware of as well. And that's something you do want to have a competent gunsmith do. You don't want to probably try that at home without a lathe. It's you can use the hand tools, and that seems to work pretty good. But you want to be very, very careful when you're doing it to make sure it's as good as you can get it. So in summary, on the accuracy issue with crowning, problems basically arise when the transitional geometry of the muzzle isn't oriented symmetrically around the axis of the bore. So basically, if it's off even a little bit, you're going to have a lot more venting of gas on one side early, and that can really put a sideways push on the heel of your bullet as it exits, and that's going to be a really bad deal. Another thing that can have an effect too, that's kind of related to the crowning issue, but it's not having to do with a bad crown, is a deformed bullet heel. A lot of guys have a lot of concern when they're loading their projectiles sometimes, especially lead-tipped bullets. Sometimes the lead tips do get deformed a little bit just from packaging or from handling or whatever, and they get kind of worried because the tip might get a little, it's not sharp, it gets blunted, or it gets pushed over to a side just a tiny bit. And what's interesting to note is if a guy does extensive testing on basically deforming bullets, you'll find that actually the tip has a lot less to do with accuracy problems than the heel does. The heel of the bullet, the backside, actually is very, very fussy as far as taking any kind of abrasion or deformities. And one of the reasons for that is because of this crowning issue. Basically, when your bullet is exiting, that seal, if there's any deformation on the heel of a bullet, you're going to encourage them gases to really put a kind of a sideways push on that bullet right as it exits, and that's going to throw it off a pretty large amount downrange. Basically, after your bullet leaves, it's going to be spinning at a pretty good rate, so that's going to mostly balance out a lot of the tip deformation you might have had. But honestly, the tip is kind of a small issue compared to the base being deformed. So take great care when you're examining your projectiles. If they did get dropped or something weird happened when you're loading these things, if the base is deformed at all, especially if you've got a square heel bullet, you're going to have big problems. That's another reason why the boat tail long range style, the real sleek long bullets, those are kind of desirable, is because it eases that transition point. That seal gets broken a little more softly if you have a tapered crown and a tapered bullet heel, like a boat tail. That's going to ease that transition point and cause less potential disturbance as that bullet exits. Okay, so another thing concerning external ballistics that we want to probably talk about here is blast and flash signatures. What we're talking about is the muzzle blast, the noise, and the flamage, the fire shooting out the end there. Those can both be issues for a long-range shooter, especially if you're going to be using this rifle in a hostile environment where you don't want to be detected, for those of you who might be wearing the uniforms. And so blast and flash is something you definitely want to be aware of. And depending on what kind of device you have attached to your muzzle or lack thereof, that's going to kind of determine what kind of blast and flash signature you have. So let's discuss some of these different muzzle devices that are in the transitional zone. So we're talking about transitional ballistics here. That's a good place to talk about this. We're going to talk about sound suppressors, more commonly known by the lay people as silencers, although they don't really silence the bullet. We'll talk about flash suppressors briefly and muzzle brakes briefly. And the questions that come up for a long-range precision shooter with these different muzzle devices is, what are their effects on accuracy? What are their effects on barrel harmonics? How do they affect muzzle velocity, point of impact repeatability, recoil, things like that? So let's just talk about it real quick here and see what we got going on. So let's talk about sound suppressors first, okay? Basically, the way this thing works is you have a device screwed onto the end of your muzzle, and it has a series of chambers in there. Very, very simple device. Pretty much a muffler for the end of your rifle. And as the gas is escaping past that bullet, you had that supersonic crack of those expanding gases. And what those chambers do is they slow that exit down. They kind of keep it pressurized, and eases the transition of those gases from a fully compressed state to an expanded and a fully burned state. And that basically takes the speed out of the escaping gases and reduces them below the sonic barrier. And so it just simply captures those gases and slows them down, and it kind of eases them out into the normal atmosphere. And that's why you have the major sound reduction, is that muzzle blast that you would have normally had is basically just reduced to a normal displacement of air type sound. You're still going to have a pretty loud sound signature with the high-powered rifle due to the fact that your projectile is still going way faster than the speed of sound in most cases. Most centerfire rifles are triple sonic or double sonic at least. So you're going to have the supersonic crack. And if you've heard a rifle shot, you got the kind of sound to it. That sound is the supersonic crack of the bullet traveling. So the suppressor kind of acts to cut down on the blast most of all. That's why a lot of guys like to use the subsonic rounds. If you're using a heavier projectile to make up for your basic lack of velocity, and you load it down below the speed of sound, you really, really quiet it down another degree further. Because not only are you reducing the muzzle blast, but now you're going below the speed of sound. So that's what the Whisper series of cartridges developed by SSK, that's kind of where they're going. And those are actually pretty effective. We can talk about those in a different series or something. But sound suppressors, How do they affect accuracy? Well, basically, this is very, very dependent on the quality of the sound suppressor and how well lined up it is with the axis of your bore. Most modern sound suppressors that are commercially available today by the big manufacturers are very, very well made, and they don't really have any negative effects on accuracy. Now, some of the older designs, they did get a reputation back in the day, like back in the old Cold War, that they would not last very many rounds and that they would terribly impact your accuracy. And the reason for that was due to how they were constructed. They had baffles that wouldn't last very long. They couldn't take a lot of shock. They'd break loose. They weren't oriented like symmetrically around the axis of the bore. They'd have baffle strikes where the bullet will hit one of the baffles on the inside there. That's going to terribly affect your accuracy. So there were problems, but they've been developed quite well nowadays. And anything made by AAC, even YHM or Surefire, any of your big brand sound suppressors, you can name a dozen of them. Any of those brands that are going to cost you a pretty penny are going to be very, very, very effective at what they do. They're going to be suppress the blast very well, and they're not going to harm your accuracy. In some cases, in the really well-made ones, I think AAC is a very good example of an extremely well-made suppressor, or Surefire, some of those other ones like that, in that price range. Your accuracy is actually, your potential of your accuracy is improved a little bit, because that transitional zone of your bullet exiting the crown of the muzzle is eased by the presence of that suppressor there. We just described how a suppressor works. That basically eases those gases. It slows them down so that they don't vent past that bullet so violently. And easing that bullet into the external phase of its flight path is going to have less potential deflection based on venting in the heel of the bullet that could possibly be asymmetrical. So if you have a very well-made suppressor and it's timed on there correctly, and it's if it's in line with your bore axis, it's actually going to increase your accuracy potential. So the good suppressors are very well suited for long-range precision rifle shooting. An issue that could possibly come up is a harmonic issue. And we talked about barrel harmonics a long time ago in one of our early videos. And basically, if you have any rattling parts on your rifle, particularly on the end of your barrel, that's going to very, very negatively affect your barrel harmonics, and that'll have a negative effect on your accuracy as well. So another thing you want to make sure to do is make sure that your sound suppressor, if you're using one, is attached very firmly and it's not wiggling loose. The second that thing starts wiggling loose, you could have a multitude of problems, one of them being harmonics, and then very soon thereafter, you're going to have baffle strikes, and you're going to have a whole nother slew of problems going along with it. So as long as it's attached solidly, and most of your designs nowadays are they're made from monolithic kind of baffle system. They're all made from one piece of machined steel for the higher quality ones. Those are going to have no effect on barrel harmonics that's negative. It'll actually improve the barrel harmonics a little bit because you have a huge weight at the end of the muzzle, which we identified kind of as a antinode region. And so that muzzle, which would normally be associated with the wildly flopping region, as we called it before, where it's vibrating very violently, adding weight to the front of that's going to be kind of like a harmonic dampener. So that will also help you out as well. Another reason a sound suppressor is advantageous for a long-range shooter, a well-made one. How about muzzle velocity? Well, because you're still kind of venting the gas forward, the gas isn't just breaking the seal and expanding in all directions. It's still being directed in a net direction that is forward. You're actually going to have a slight increase in muzzle velocities on many of your well-made rifle suppressors. And sometimes you can have a reduction in muzzle velocity. Sometimes it won't change hardly at all. But a lot of times you will see an increase of 15, 20 feet a second, sometimes more, sometimes less. So actually, it will not negatively affect your velocity as well, especially if it's a well-made suppressor designed for that exact caliber you're using it in. Point of impact repeatability is an issue. that's going to happen when you're using a sound suppressor. And what we're talking about here is you're going to have your rifle zeroed. We're going to get into that in a later video coming up pretty soon here. We're going to take you through how to properly zero your rifle and all that. But you're going to have it zeroed for 100 meters, we'll say, just to start off with here. And if you attach a suppressor, you're going to have a different dynamic. You're going to have a slightly different muzzle velocity, and you're going to have the way the gases exert themselves as the bullet is exiting is going to be slightly different than with a muzzle device not attached. Also, your harmonics have been changed due to the weight on the end of the barrel, and all the other issues just from adding a big chunk of metal on the end of your muzzle is going to affect your point of impact, sometimes significantly. It can move it an inch or two sometimes. So what you're going to want to do, if you're using a a sound suppressor, is you're going to want to record exactly what your deflection is, your point of impact shift at 100 meters, and you're going to write that down. And I'll show you how to set that up in your ballistics tables, so that if you do plan on taking a suppressor off for some reason or putting it back on, changing it, you can deal with it. I would recommend, if you are using a sound suppressor, to just attach it and leave it on there until you need to clean it. And when you reinstall it, reconfirm your zero and try to install it. Have it timed the same way it was last time. Like have it, make a little mark to see how it was screwed on. Make sure it kind of lines up the same way. If not, you're going to have to just reconfirm your zero there. So that's something to be aware with sound suppressors. It might change your point of impact. Sometimes it won't. Recoil, because you have added weight onto the rifle system and particularly the end of the muzzle, sound suppressors do actually reduce recoil significantly. And obviously sound, the effects of sound signature is it reduces it. So it's kind of a win-win-win-win situation with sound suppressors. As long as we're using well-made sound suppressors and they're properly installed, they are very, very advantageous to long-range shooters. So it's something that I would probably recommend. Only problem in the United States is sometimes it's a hassle, depending on what state you live in, to get a hold of one. You have to go through, you got to get the right forms from the U.S. Treasury or whatever, and you got to have the sheriff sign off on it, and kind of a pain in the butt, you know. But if you're in certain places in Europe or other countries, a lot of those places, it's just kind of an over-the-counter type transaction. And it's like a muffler on a car. They'll yell at you if you're not using one. They say, "What's the matter with you? Why aren't you, how uncourteous of you to not have your suppressor attached?" So that's something that if you can afford one and it's not too much of a pain in the butt for paperwork, I would recommend using one. Flash suppressors. That's another topic. If you're going to see these mostly on your semi-automatic sniper systems as far as your long-range rifles. You could go ahead and equip a rifle with a flash suppressor. You could thread it and attach a flash suppressor on a bolt action if you wanted. What these basically do is they cause kind of a turbulence into the mixing of that fuel-laden burning gas that's coming out from your propellant as it's exiting the muzzle. And by introducing turbulence to that fireball on its way out, it's going to kind of make it burn less efficiently. And it's going to reduce the combustion efficiency of the gas mixture, and it's going to basically deaden your flash. So that's how that works. It's just adding turbulence, simply. Now, there's a million different, well, there's not a million, but there's a lot of different flash suppressor designs out there. It's kind of funny because most people choose their flash suppressors based on how cool they look. Kind of a superficial kind of estimation. Oh, man, that looks kind of pokey on the end. I heard that one a lot. So you don't want to choose your suppressor by how pokey or non-pokey it looks, or by what kind of design it has on it. You're going to want to see what suppresses the flash most effectively. And some of the military accepted models do work pretty good. I think the best one that I've seen for most of your AR-10, AR-15 type rifle designs are the Phantoms. Work very, very well. Sometimes they completely eliminate the flash, even in the pitch black. You might just see a couple sparks, or if you have a real nasty load, you might see a little bit of a flame come out. But a flash suppressor is very effective. And like we said before, it's advantageous to certain lines of work to use devices such as a sound suppressor and a flash suppressor. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention on your sound suppressor is obviously a sound suppressor is going to completely eliminate your flash as well. But a flash suppressor, to a lesser degree, is going to also do that. So it's just going to scatter your gas and cause it to burn without so much flash going on. So I would recommend those. Another nice thing about a flash suppressor, even on a bolt action, is that it will protect your rifle crown from damage. If you drop the muzzle into the gravel or on a sidewalk or whatever you're doing, that might kind of save your butt. So a flash suppressor, even a muzzle brake attached to the end of your muzzle is kind of nice just for that reason alone. Just giving you peace of mind that your crown region didn't get bunged up because you had a flash suppressor protecting it. So there's lots of different designs out there. You can read the different reviews on those different flash suppressors. Lots of guys did excellent tests on that, so there's no need for me to really belabor that point. I don't want to be redundant again. You guys probably already studied that subject out in great detail. So flash suppressors, they don't really negatively affect accuracy. Again, if they're well designed and if they're properly installed, unless it's really getting in the way or if it's not on the axis of the bore, or if it's loose or something, that'll affect your barrel harmonics. So you want to make sure, again, that it's tight. Your velocity, you're not going to see any significantly noticeable differences in velocity, generally speaking. There are some designs that are, different that might have a slight change in velocity. Some of the longer ones, for example. Your point of impact repeatability, again, you might experience point of impact shift just due to the harmonics being changed. It's not going to negatively affect your harmonics, but it will change your harmonics anytime you change the weight on the barrel. Also, some of the different designs can offer a slight sound reduction. Sometimes weird legal issues pop up, so make sure whatever you're attaching is legal wherever you live. What else to say about flash suppressors here? I generally do like the use of flash suppressors on most of my rifles that are, especially the semi-autos that come with them. That's a desirable feature to have, and there's no reason why it's going to negatively affect your accuracy for long-range shooting, unless something is improperly mounted or something goofy's going on. Muzzle brakes, we did talk about muzzle brake pull-off. That's an internal ballistics thing because that's affecting the projectile while it's inside the rifle. But as far as transitional ballistics, basically you have the venting of the gas pulling the rifle forward to decrease recoil. This can increase the rearward and sideways blast significantly. And your blast signature is not going to suppress a flash like a flash suppressor will generally. It will split up your flash. Instead of having a large column of fire shooting out in one direction, it might split it up depending on the orientation of the vents on your muzzle brake. But most muzzle brakes that I would recommend for long-range precision shooting, again, and I think I talked about this before, is you want it to vent the gas sideways and up. You don't want to be venting any gas downwards. You're going to be laying prone a lot of times on the sand or on the dirt or on the, in the vegetation. And if you're venting gas down, like in some of the helical pattern muzzle brakes, where you have the holes all 360 degrees around the barrel, you're going to be shooting dust into your mouth, and you're going to get a mouthful of twigs. It's not going to be very good for you. Also with muzzle brakes, because of all that disturbance on all the ground around you, that dust signature is going to be a bad deal for certain situations, like I said before, depending on your line of work. So if you have the option between a sound suppressor and a muzzle brake, and you everything warrants that there's no problem with using a sound suppressor, go ahead and do the sound suppressor. It's not going to give away your position like a muzzle brake would. Oh, another thing about the flash suppressors as well is you don't want the downward facing vents on those either. It'll do the same thing a muzzle brake would have. So, in conclusion, you're going to want to be aware of these different things when we're talking about transitional ballistics. You're also going to want to be aware of the tactical implications of each one of these different devices and things to be aware of, particularly in giving away your position or some other things a guy could talk about on that note would be that with flash suppressors or muzzle brakes, or if you're not using any device, if you just have a normal target crown and You do expect there to be dry dust signature arising, and you need to conceal your position. One thing a lot of guys can do is they wet a rag and lay it down in front of the muzzle. That can kind of act to dampen that dust signature. Or old Hathcock used to just pour his canteen out in front of the ground and wet down the ground in front of him to kind of get rid of the dust signature. So there are things you can do there. But the overall moral of the story here is don't be shy to go ahead and use a muzzle device as you see fit. Do be aware of your equipment selection. Make sure you get a good piece of equipment and that is designed to do whatever it is you're trying to accomplish, whether that be suppressing the sound in the flash, or if you just want to disperse your flash or deaden your flash, or if you're using night vision equipment, you're definitely going to want to use a suppressor of some kind, either a sound or a flash suppressor. Muzzle brakes, you want to take, some cartridges, you just can't get around it. They have such fierce recoil, you're going to be using a muzzle brake. And if you don't have the option of a sound suppressor to help dampen the recoil, and you're using a muzzle brake, you want to be very aware when you're setting up your firing position and where your spotter is orienting himself, and how you choose that firing position. Just kind of have it in the back of your mind where that blast is oriented, and if it's going to cause any disturbance in the dust around you, or if it's going to blow your partner's ears out or whatever. So you hopefully are going to be both wearing hearing protection, but sometimes if you have to make a shot in a pinch, it's very, very loud on the guy next to you who wasn't anticipating it. So just be aware of these different things when you're making your choice, and you guys should be good to go. Next video is going to be an introduction to how to make our ballistics tables. We're finally getting into our external ballistics, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how these tables are set up, and as we go through each category, I'll show you how to get those situated in your tables, and we will discuss each different topic of the external ballistics as we go through them, putting our tables together. So we will cover everything, including our spin drift and Coriolis drift and all our different factors that you're going to have to be aware of as we go through these ballistics tables. So stay tuned. And again, thank you to all you guys who are out there helping out, answering the questions in the comments section. I've been quite swamped with questions lately, so it's been hard for me to answer every question as prompted as I would have liked to. But to all of you guys who are pretty familiar with a lot of these things, if you know the answer, go ahead and help each other out. So that's very much appreciated, all the help we're getting on very good discussions on this video series. So I'm going to have to shift my priorities from answering questions to putting out some more of these videos for you guys. I kind of got bogged down on questions, so I'm just going to work on getting these videos out, and then hopefully I can come back and catch up and answer some of those questions, as many as I can. So if I don't get back to you right away, don't feel too bad. It's just that I'm slowly working my way towards it, hopefully. Okay, I'll catch you guys later, and we'll get this next video out for you hopefully shortly.